going better. It started off in Santa Anita, where he amassed several $100,000 of prize money, graded stakes victories, ended up finishing second in the Santa Anita Jockeys Championship, went to Keeneland, graded stakes winners there, had valuable winners on Saudi Cup night, won the Shima Classic for his old boss, I beg your pardon, the Dubai Turf for his old boss, John Gosden, came back to this country, and after being unceremoniously deposited on the turf in the Greenham Stakes on Chaldean, made amends last weekend with victory in the 2,000 guineas. That, plus a chest of ours this week, and he was off to Belmont Park last night. You'd hardly think he was going to retire at the end of the year, but he is, and he is being shepherded along the way by his longtime ally, friend, business partner, sometime mentor, Peter Burrell, who joins me now. Peter, good morning. Thanks for coming in.
Morning, Nick. Thanks for having me.
I don't know how it feels to have your life and career defined by your relationship with one man, one sportsman, as it will be in your case, but do you mind?
No, not at all. I'm very proud to have known Frankie for all these years. Really, he's looked after me as much as I've looked after him. You know, it's just been a mutual gallop.
So when did you first get to know him?
I first met Frankie properly in a betting shop in Newmarket, Cuffy's shop, where we used to go and gamble every day. We were hopeless, lunatic gamblers at the time. I'd seen him in the strings on the horse walk because I was working for Julie Cecil at the time, and so Lucas Stringer come past us every day, and there'd be always a bit of banter. And we finally met in the betting shop one day.
We lost Julie Cecil very sadly not long ago. I mean, a towering figure. I'd love to know a little bit about working with her and your friendship with her.
I was so lucky to know both Henry and Julie really well. My grandfather had many good horses with Henry, and then when they split up, I went to work for Julie at Southgate, and we had about 40, 50 horses, and she was a much more successful trainer than people give her credit for. You know, one year we took 3 to Royal Ascot, 2 won and 1 dead heated. You know, she was a target trainer, like her father.
But Noel Merlis.
Yep, absolutely.
And an incredible human being as well.
Oh, humour, constant humour. You know, she was the one who got Kevin Bloody Wilson to come and play at Newmarket. The jokes were constant.
Not sure you could get away with that now.
Not anymore, but, you know, they were wonderful, wonderful days. You know, Leicester walking in and out of the door. And every time someone like Francois Boutin or the Heads were in Newmarket, they would always come for tea with Julie. Always. You knew they would be coming. So half of my job was making tea and serving drinks to them.
Well, you didn't mind that?
No, I didn't. I loved it, every single minute of it, Nick. I've been very lucky.
And these were rare times. As you say, you had a pedigree in the sport. Your grandfather was a legendary figure who started the National Stud. Yeah,
I was very, very lucky. My grandfather had a wonderful, inquiring mind. He adored racing. He built the National Stud in '66, started in '63. The Queen opened it in '66. He moved it from Ireland. As you know, it's owned by everybody in this country. It's there for educational purposes and hopefully some commercial practicalities that come with it. And he retired in '72, having got Mill Reef to stand there. He persuaded Paul Mellon to stand him.
Which was a huge result. And
yes,
he had a fair bit of success as well.
Yes, he did. And Grandpa was lucky enough to land up with a stallion called Be My Chief at the end of his life. And he was always determined, of course, that the horse would stand there. I mean, as is likely, he wasn't, you know, the greatest stallion of all time. 95% of them aren't, but that gave my grandfather enormous pleasure. He came from a year at Royal Ascot where he and Henry took 2 horses there. Polar Boy won the Britannia and Be My Chief won the Chesham. You know, it just looks so easy.
So you have been associated with people who have had great success in the sport. Might you have been a trainer?
I kind of wanted to, yeah. I mean, the sort of derivation of it was that I would work for Julie and then maybe scrabble my way over to America and work for someone like John there and then come back. But progressively, my grandfather put me off it. You know, at the time, it was a much, much smaller game, Nick, and the thought process was that if you were going to train, you might as well do it abroad, and I didn't really want to do that, you know.
So what happened next?
What happened next was we were in the betting shop. Frankie's chalking the board. which a lot of people watching this show today won't even know what that means, but racing was only broadcast over an airwave where you could listen to it. You know, we didn't have screens in the shops, so the prices would come from the track. You remember how that happened better than me, but you had a guy on a blackboard changing the prices, right?
No, I don't want to.
Yeah, okay.
I don't want to say anything, but I barely remember
I know.
the chalk in the betting
Well,
shops.
we were just saying I left school 15 years before you did, but those were the days. And anyway, the race went off, and Frankie jumped down. I said, "What are you doing?" He said, "I've done my everything to Cuffy. I can't afford to pay it off. I've got to work in here for 14 afternoons." And I said, "What about Luca? What's he going to say if you're not there at evening stables?" He said, "I've got someone else to do my horse." So he said, "It'll actually be done better than me." That's the only place he's going to get suspicious.
He'd subcontracted.
Subcontracted that bit. And he said, "As long as I get on the train by 5 o'clock when Luca walks around, I'm fine." And then he said to me, "I've got my first ride next week." I said, "That's great, Frankie." I said, "You'll be the best jockey in the world." I never know why I said it to this day. And I said, "You won't be inside this sport, you'll be outside of this sport." But I could feel it then,
Really?
Absolutely. I mean, he's so charismatic,
But did you know whether he could ride?
Well, that leads to another story. This was a very coincidental 24 hours, Nick. If you don't mind, I'll quickly fill you in.
We've got time, Pete.
Horses of Julie's that were going to Ascot the following week. We had a work morning the next morning. I was to leg up Steve Cawthon, Pat Hedry and Leicester, which is quite a triumvirate to have legged up for a really serious piece of work. And Steve was circling up at the front. I can't remember, I think he was riding a horse called Nice. Leicester was on Kingfisher Mill of Lord Howard de Walden's that won the King Edward. And Steve looked round, he went, "Ready?" And Pat went, "Yeah." And Leicester just grunted, and Steve jumped off. And I watched Leicester take 2 turns, and then he jumped off. I went up on the hack. I could hear Julie screaming and shouting at him. He'd still finished in front of the other 2. And we went back to Southgate for breakfast. We're sitting there. Julie's looking at the racing post, knocking the top off her boiled egg, steam coming out of her ears. Pat sitting there not saying much. Steve is saying nothing. And the kitchen door opens. And in he comes, Leicester. And everyone's like, "Oh my God, what's going to happen now?" So he gets a cup of coffee, sits down at the table, cool as you like. And Julie's still not looked up. And he said, "That'll win Ascot next week, Julie." And she went, "I know it will. And you're riding it, Pat." To which there was another deafening silence. And I said to Leicester, "Oh, Leicester," I said, "I was talking to Frankie in the betting shop yesterday. Do you know much about him?" And he just looked at me and he said, "He's the best I've ever seen." And I said, "Are you pulling my leg?" He went, "No, he's the best."
Seriously?
Yeah.
And that was before he'd even had a ride in public?
Absolutely, yeah.
So where did the business arrangement come between you and Frankie then?
Well, he had a lovely agent called Matty, who was an ex-brickie, really. He used to hang around the betting shop, so he said he'd book the rides. And we just had this feeling we could do something outside of the sport.
But you were never his ride booker, were you?
No, never, ever. Never.
So Matty kept on with the rides?
Matty kept on with that, yeah, until eventually Ray took over that side of it.
Ray Cochrane.
We've got to mention Ray in this story at some point, because without him, there would be no Frankie now. And, yeah, off we set, and progressively went out into the world.
So is this before the Magnificent Seven?
This was, about 4 years before it. So weirdly, even by the Magnificent Seven, we had a book out that week, and they had to take it off the press and insert a final chapter in it. Tony Stafford had written that with us.
So when that happened, when he rode the 7 winners at Ascot,
yeah,
were you there that day?
I wasn't. I was at home in Newmarket, and again, Nick, it was so weird, watching the first 3. Then I think I went out into the garden and was doing something, and Sally came running out of the house. She went, "My God, he's just won the 5th race," and then someone from the BBC rang and said they were holding the news. They were going to show the 7th race at Ascot. So I went into Newmarket to watch the 6th one in the betting shop then, because we had no access to everything then, did we? And then, back home to watch it, and just sat there wondering what the hell had happened,
And then, of course, it was it was Dettori everywhere. It was Dettori on top of the pops. It was Dettori's pizza chain. It was Dettori's ice creams. It was Dettori's restaurants. It was. How did you manage that?
Well, we just sort of jumped from novices, really. You know, by the Monday morning.
Did you know what you were doing?
No, of course not. I mean, not a clue. We were just, you know, someone rang up and said, will you present Top of the Pops next Thursday? Yes. Sure.
Did you know what to charge them?
We had an inkling. We knew that TV fees weren't anything spectacular, but we knew in those days we had to get on the television to get out to the other stuff. Yeah, and, you know, we started to pick up some really decent deals at Yves Saint Laurent and Alfa Romeo and other book deals, and then, of course, Your World came along. There was Question of Sport and that type of thing, you know. So, and because of Frankie, by then I was already working for Vinnie Jones and for Ronnie Wood at the time, you know.
So you understood a little bit about that world, about the entertainment world.
Yeah.
To what extent, though, were you very conscious of the fact that you had a jockey with a very important job in the sort of heyday of his Godolphin period, as he's quite often fond of reminding me? He's ridden over 100 Group or Grade 1 wins in those Royal Blue Silks and fond of reminding everyone else, and you can see why. But to what extent were you conscious of your responsibilities to him as a sportsman as well as a commodity?
Well,
you had to keep him on the job.
Half the reason I think it's worked is that I'd had 10 years outside of racing before this, but then I'd been kind of brought up in racing, so I understood racing people, and therefore John Gosden, Luca Cumani and Godolphin always came first. So half the reason we haven't done more is never knowing where he's going to be. That's always been the problem, you know. So I'm, you know, rubbing my hands together about next year. We haven't even got going yet.
I'll come to that in a moment, but it's interesting you say that. So if you'd been someone from outside the sport, but still with the same kind of commercial instincts, the same hunger to try and generate as much income as possible, you don't think it would have worked?
We did try it once for 9 months when I had a bookmaking business, and in those days still you couldn't really be representative in racing.
You couldn't do
which
that.
Reminds me of another funny story. So we let somebody else do it, but I had to keep diving in to save it, and it never worked. You know, racing's still very touchy-feely. You know, as much as we'd like to think we're getting
outward-facing.
Yeah.
You know how insular the sport is.
Yes, very much so, especially in the pure equine side of it. You know.
What about, I mean, obviously, Dettori has a massive fan base. He has retained that fan base, even though there have been bumps in the road, which he talks about pretty openly.
Yes.
How difficult was it for you to manage those bumps in the road when he had his ban for the cocaine ban and when he left Godolphin and so forth? Were they difficult and challenging to manage for you?
massive gulfs. I mean, in 2013, we thought it was all over. We really did. When he came back, you know, he couldn't get a ride or get on a horse, Nick. But I suppose that the glue that's kept us together is his talent. And as I've always said to you, we've spoken quite often, and quite often they've been in tricky times. And I've always said to you, Nick, never forget how tough this guy is. He's much tougher than people think. You know, I mean, I know it always looks like those jump jockeys should be the toughest guys out there, but this guy he's a street fighter. You know, he never fails to get back to the top. He's an amazing person. He's an extraordinary human being. You know, if he was only educated to the age of 13. You know, people
formally, yeah.
People forget that. You know, he's a very intelligent guy.
So effectively, self-taught.
Yep.
A great mental resilience.
The toughest I've ever come across. You know.
So 2013, if that was the low point in your mind, did you think, he will get back?
Yeah. No, I think I was doubtful too. He was pretty doubtful. You know, I mean, really, the job with Al Shakab was what saved our life, because it gave him a little bit of purpose again, and pride. You know, Frankie needs pride. He does need his pride. So that got him back to a level where, you know, Trev was around then, and these type of animals, which that made the difference. You know, because he is primarily a jockey. That's what he is. You know.
But you talk about personal pride. Of course, Trev was one issue where his pride was significantly dented because Cricket Head took him off the horse and Thierry Janet was allowed to ride her again, even though he had the Alcher Cab retainer.
But again, with some bad luck, Nick, do you remember he was cantering down to the start?
Nottingham, broke his ankle, couldn't ride her the first time.
Absolute freak, which was a shame because he'd just won the Vermeil or something on that, hadn't he? Yeah.
But that little knock there, and the more significant one of in the end, parting company with Godolphin, to rebuild following that is going to be very challenging. Absolutely.
I mean, I think the shock of it ending with Godolphin, that was never, ever foreseen. He should have been there forever in his mind. That was a job for life, you know. Yeah. And he got on very, very well with all that team. And he still does now, you know, and he's incredibly fond of Sheikh Mohammed and everything Sheikh Mohammed's done for him, you know, make no mistake about that, as is the rest of Newmarket, you know.
But of course, getting back in the Royal Blue colours to ride Group 1 winners again, I know that meant an awful lot to him. Let me talk a little bit about this year and how he's going through it. It seems to me that, and I talked to him about this the other day, that just being relentlessly busy is what suits him. He thrives on being on that hamster wheel all the time.
He does. You know, he likes it at 38,000 feet with a hot towel on his head. He's kind of like, you know, I suppose that's been his whole career. He's been the first ever international jockey too, hasn't he, where people haven't used local jockeys. They're happy to drop Frankie, I think, almost into any racetrack in the world, right? You know, he can pick it up straight away 6 hours off the plane, you know. So, yeah, he does like that. I think that's going to be a big problem.
and that's what I was coming to next. Yeah. Someone who is clearly thriving on the highly adrenalised nature of this year, from California to Kentucky, back here, riding a Guineas winner, riding in Chester. You've got the Derby round the corner. You've got the Dreams Alive. You've got all the events planned for him at Royal Ascot and beyond, and the big celebration, then the Breeders' Cup. Do I go to Melbourne? How does a guy like that suddenly switch it off?
Well, I think first of all, let's start this conversation with let's never say never to anything, because every human being has a right to a life, right, don't they? And if they're going well at what they're doing, then, you know, who's ever to say? But I strongly believe that after the 21st of October, his life will take a different direction. He won't ride in England again. Whether he goes on to Japan or Australia, one can only hope. But I think you've got to set a date, and the Breeders' Cup is that date at this time. He's got a very busy life to come. Whether his body naturally wants to slow down a bit now, he's going to be 53. Definitely don't need a fall or anything like that, you know.
But it's a question of how you then, as someone who's trying to commercialise
keep
opportunities
him busy,
outside the sport,
give
him enough to keep him mentally stimulated.
Yeah, we've got a lot going on, actually, Nick. There's more than enough to keep a 55-year-old, you know, happy.
But this isn't a 55-year-old, is it?
Not quite yet, no.
This is a 25-year-old in a 55-year-old's body.
Very good analogy. I like that. Yeah.
So are you allowed to tell me what any of it is? Apart from the art, I mean, surely he'll pop up on
all the obvious things. I mean, like recently we've done a really exciting deal with David Howden and the Howden Insurance Group. So we're going to be heavily involved with them and helping them to sell their new products. We have other commercial relationships with, you know, I'm not being commercial now, but people like Racing Brakes. So we've been working with them for 6 years. We own a percentage of that business. So we have a lot of other responsibilities, probably be some media work, I should think, and we take it from there.
But short of sending him down the Cresta Run 15 times every day for 365 days, you can't get that adrenaline. I thought the film was one of the best of its type that I'd seen. That Nick Ryle and his team produced really during COVID, and he always says, Frankie Dettori always says, I don't know, it was COVID, it was difficult, it would have been better with the crowds, but there was something about it that made it much more personal, and you got to see him in slightly more in the raw, I think, than people had seen him. And what came across very strongly was Catherine's role in the last 30 years. Just how crucial has that been?
Yeah, she's the absolute rock around him. I mean, you know, he can breeze in and out of that house like he has done this morning. He's back from America already this morning, probably watching this now.
Throwing fruit at the
chuckling
TV.
To himself, yeah, exactly. Just going, oh my God, what's he going to say next?
I can see him saying, watch Burrell here.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. No, but Nick, no, Catherine is the absolute stalwart. She's always pulled it back together. And she gave him the original wake-up call he needed, after the big ban of 6 months,
And of course, I mean, we've spoken about this at the time, spoken about it with Frankie, spoken about it with John Gosden, spoken about it with Thady on the sofa the other day. This was the great enduring partnership, which had a little fissure midway through last year, but they seem to be finishing strong, as they say.
Absolutely, and I think it's only right and good that is happening. I think it gives probably Claire Haven and John and Thady time to set their new rhythms and routines. I mean, look.
Do you think it's easier for them all now that there is a defined end date?
Possibly. I think John's been so important to Frankie, and he has always been such a good trainer. I've always believed in John Gosden as a fantastic trainer. He's a great judge of a horse. He runs a big operation very well. He's an intelligent man, and he and Frankie have really suited each other. John's been a rock. But of course, Luca was the one who saw the original genius, and Luca always was the best judge of a jockey, right? From Jimmy Fortune and Ray Cochrane and all of them the whole way through. So I think Frankie's very, very lucky to have had, Luca, Saeed, John, and a bit of Charlie Appleby thrown in.
But as you said from the beginning, to use the old cliche, you do make your own luck, don't you? You can't be lucky that many times,
It seems like he can. I mean, Nick, when you and I originally discussed it, I mean, it was, the Aidan, Butler and Santa Anita situation, a lot of that was down to you, but of course he gets there and he rides a treble on the opening day, so he's got no problem picking up rides at that point, has he? I mean, it's extraordinary. He just jumped into that and away he went for 3 months.
But it's interesting, isn't it? Because even though Frankie Dettori is a big name in America and has ridden all these Breeders' Cup winners, the parochial nature of it and the paucity of opportunity and the kind of relentlessness of it means that you wouldn't automatically assume that somebody parachuting themselves into a jurisdiction is going to get whoever they are going to get a ton of rides. But it was starting strong, I suppose.
It was.
The key.
And actually,
again,
you're right, Nick. Not many trainers used him, did they? Funnily enough, it was quite a sort of small handful at Santa Anita, wasn't it?
Well, there is only a small handful.
There is a small handful, but yeah, exactly. It was primarily 2 or 3, weren't there? Peter Burrell and George Papa Prodrome, who's become a great friend, actually. Lovely team, Simon Callahan, lovely lot.
So, do you think that beyond this year, that could be another winter, or do you just get
look, who knows? Let's get to the 21st of October. That's the big one here, and then we got the Breeders' Cup, and that is really important to arrive at that destination, Nick. Really,
And York, of course, this week.
York, very exciting. York are opening a pub called the Flying Frankie in his honour, with one of the local Yorkshire brewers, which is fabulous. I mean, the racetracks are being amazing, Nick. They're, some of them are really seizing it. Ascot, primarily.
OK, and we are going to York in a few moments' time. Pete's going to stay with us. I'll be talking to the Chief Executive and Clerk of the Course, William Darby, when you rejoin us, and not just about...
Watch live racing now on racingtv.com.